Well, for deciduous trees, conifers are a bit different because, again, Ben had already mentioned, conifers put a lot more energy in producing needles for evergreens. They have those waxy cuticles. They hold on to their needles for, at least spruces, for about 3 years. So there's a lot of reserve energy that is trusted on those that foliage staying there for the evergreens. They're evergreen. Deciduous trees, as Chad Rigsby mentioned it, they're like nature's potato chips. The foliage is pretty cheap when it comes to the energy reserves to the tree, and a lot of trees can handle being completely stripped and they'll bounce back. There's cost to that, but you got a healthy forest environment, they have those reserves. It looks bad at the surface, but underneath those trees, they're built like a tank. So you have to have a little bit of trust in that, knowing that they're not in a stressed environment. So you know that those reserves exist. So this is just kind of a nifty little chart the graph is the cost of tissue damage, like how much damage is actually happening to the tree. How much can the tree take of that damage before it dies? And this, I believe, is more of like how long does that damage linger in terms to us, to the tree. So up here, down here is leaves. You got the folivores. They're feeding on the foliage. Folivores, like omnivores, carnivores, folivores. So those are going to be those caterpillars. There's two different areas. You got repeated mid-season, the early mid-season, and you can see how it makes this more oval. The bark up here is, as you can see, it says cankers and vascular wilts. Anybody here familiar with oak wilt? Oak wilt is a very devastating disease, and I hope it never happens to anyone. But that's almost instant tree death for red oaks. And so the cost of damage is it plugs up the vascular system. The tree can't get the nutrients. There's no recovery. It's gone. And it lasts for years because, well, the tree's now dead, and it also spreads through the root system. So where I'm getting at here is down here, there's natural predators, but with gypsy moths, there's no predators there, but they are a folivore. It's happening early enough in the season. The damage doesn't linger, and again, leaves being those potato chips, there's not a lot of cost to the damage involved. It looks bad, but again, the cost in terms of the tree's resources isn't as bad as you might think. So again, it's pretty down here. We're going to be a lot more worried about things more in this general area. So like, are you familiar with emerald ash borers? It's kind of in par with the vascular wilts because they go in, they destroy the vascular system. The vascular system, once you damage that, there's a very thin border, the cambium, in which the trees actually grow. Once that is damaged, it takes a lot longer to recover. But leaves, there's buds, there's latent buds. It's as simple as the tree knowing that there's sunlight hitting here and we aren't getting any nutrients. So let's spend some more of our energy to get the leaves out, and it has that energy. So when it comes to foliation, someone had mentioned here that you see defoliation, the leaves come back smaller. There is cost associated with losing the leaves. And what it looks like is you're going to see a loss of nitrogen. And I'll go over that a little bit more. And during that season, when those leaves are defoliated, there's that period, if it leaves back out, it can start photosynthesizing. It needs to recover the energy lost to create those leaves, but the energy lost means that there's less energy to grow next season. Doesn't necessarily mean it's lost. It just means that, you know, like when COVID hit, the factory shut down, a lot of the production slowed down, and it takes a while to build it back up. So this chart, this is research, does it say when this research was done? 2015, so relatively recent. Gypsy moth's been around for a while. There's been a lot of research. A lot of it's compiled in here. So right here was a gypsy moth defoliation event. And this is essentially a measure of basal growth. So diameter of tree, it's measuring the growth of that tree. And it's like an aerial measurement. So you're taking a plot, you're measuring all the trees, and you're seeing how much it grows each year. So when it's more horizontal, it's consistent growth. Does that make sense to everyone? Horizontal means it's consistently growing. So when there was a defoliation attack, you can see it started to dip a little bit during that year. But the subsequent year, because there was a carbohydrate loss, there was a nitrogen loss, there was still a loss in growth. But there was still growth. There's still growth. It's just not, it's not comparable to the plot that wasn't attacked. But you can see the defoliation happened this year. That was the only year it was recorded for this plot. And, you know, there is an increase the year after. It, according to the research of one defoliation, 2 years of recovery, it kind of gets back to that horizontal. And that's with no management to it, from my understanding. Again, so this is going to be looking more at nitrogen. So this is control, which means that there has been no defoliation. This side is with defoliation. So no defoliation, defoliation, 1 year, 2 years. So first year you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a dip in the nitrogen compared to the normal, the nominal year, or the nominal with the control with no defoliation. There is a little bit of dip in nitrogen. It's not significant, but essentially what happens is when the caterpillars feed on the foliage, they need nitrogen to grow. Nitrogen is, makes amino acids. Amino acids is protein. That's vital for them to grow, transform into the moths, make their eggs, complete their life cycle. But when moths get up and go, they fly away, they're taking that nitrogen with them. In a forest setting, the nitrogen, it's a cycle. The leaves come out, the leaves drop, the nutrients are restored into the ground. When the leaves are lost and they fly away from the moths that ate them, nitrogen is leaving that forest ecosystem. So that's one of the things to consider in that management plan is there could be a loss of nitrogen. Carbohydrates is the energy. So there's nitrogen isn't the nutrient needed to create the chlorophyll and the leaves. So nitrogen, think of foliage, leaves. Carbohydrates is essentially the energy to get that leaf there. It's that energy for that tree to breathe and do the processes it needs to do to be healthy. The research for this is there is generally a drop in the year after defoliation, but immediately the second year, the carbohydrate levels are right back to where they need to be. So essentially, this tells us is we lose the nitrogen, but the carbohydrates, the year that you didn't have the leaf coverage getting the sugars from the sun, We saw a deficit from that year, but very quickly the next year, because those leaves are back out and healthy, we're kind of back to where we need to be. So this goes more to show that 1 year attack, absolutely not big of a deal. When you have multiple years attack, you do have to worry about the carbohydrates level, but those nitrogen levels are going to be the ones that are really depleting. Especially if the cycle drops and you know the caterpillars are migrating elsewhere, or moths at that point. So again, dip in the carbohydrates of a year where there's defoliation, but it bounces right back to a normal level. Just reiterating, no lasting effects in the carbohydrates, but you can see an effect with the nutrition of the soil. So when it comes to repeated attacks, this is when we start to worry about the mortality of trees. We call it a decline spiral, and a lot of this has to do with other stresses going on as well. Because trees can handle defoliation year after year, but if it stresses the trees out, and when there is stress, it's like everything else knows, there's an easy meal. Borers, pathogens, when those start entering the ecosystem and they're not able to be controlled because the tree is stressed, that's when you're more likely to see loss of trees. The other thing to keep in mind is the loss, not necessarily of trees, but it's of branches. So the one thing I like to think of trees as like a factory, right? Trees' jobs are to create sugars. They also create that, precious oxygen that we love. And when a limb, branch, twig isn't producing as much of those carbohydrates, it's not getting the sunlight it needs, the factory manager is like, you're fired. You're not producing. That's what's happening to those lower branches, canopies in forests. That's why, they're reaching for the light. They, want to thrive. They want to go to the top of the chain in the factory, right? They want to be successful. And everybody below, they're the first out. They get fired, and the branch will naturally shed those. Well, if you have trees that are constantly losing leaves, you're going to probably end up seeing some dieback because of related to that. Does it mean it's going to kill the tree? Not necessarily. It means the tree is going to probably find new places to sprout out.